Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm like a tiny bit late. I was just making tea and I was like, wait a minute, I need to set up. And I was just wrestling with my camera position and everything. How was everyone's weekend? I feel like it's been so long since the last stream. And I can't wait to find out what happens next. Like, the last stream was such a doozy, and I just have no idea where we go from here. Oh, Henry, you've spent the day sewing and patching up your Shelian hat. Oh my god, what convention are you going to? That's awesome. I wish I knew how to sew. Like, I've sort of done cosplay before, but it was just throwing together clothes that kind of looked like the character because I have no idea how to make a costume. Yeah, I am so excited for today. I apologize if, like, sometimes when I'm tired, my eye twitches, and I was, like, feeling my eye twitch right as I was getting ready for the stream. So if you catch my eye twitching, I'm so sorry. Oh, Henry, that's really cool. Oh, nice. Um, so we are not quite in the middle of volume 2, and we're on page 157 for chapter 47, which is called Important Person. And I guess I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Hold on. I'm trying to remember what was happening because I feel like I completely blacked out towards the end. Oh my god, no. We were getting... Gumon got his slave collar back on. Or he's about to get his slave collar back on. He's about to. Okay. Super fun stuff. Oh, am I lagging? It says I have an excellent connection. But I don't know if that's a lie. Tell me if it's lagging for anybody else. I see War Dove and Blue. It's lagging for y'all. Okay. Already got the collar back on. That's right. Cool. Okay. Alright, that's good. Okay. Chapter 47, Important Person. Things would have been fine if Zhang Yeshue hadn't said anything. But as soon as he spoke up, Yue Chunqing turned furious, as if he'd been jabbed in a tender spot in his heart. As if, he yelled, my fourth uncle is super good to me. I'd revere him no matter how he treats me. It's not your place to comment. That's not what I meant. Faced with the sight of Yue Chunqing fuming with anger, Jiang Yeshue found himself at a loss. Just what? If we hadn't bumped into you, fourth uncle wouldn't have left. He promised to teach me how to choose spirit stones today. This is your fault. You made him leave. Consumed by his animosity toward Jiang Yeshue, Yue Chunqing turned away with his arms crossed as soon as he finished yelling, unwilling to even look at him. Jiang Yeshue, clearly wounded by this treatment, summoned a forced smile and did his best to smooth things over. You've already started to learn the grades of spirit stones? Humph. This is very difficult to master and requires careful guidance. If you want, I can... Yue Chunqing pouted. No, you can't. I don't want you teaching me at all. You're nothing compared to my fourth uncle. Jiang Yeshue fell silent and lowered his eyes. After a while, he said, You're right. I really can't compare with Chu Yi. Humph. My apologies, Jiang Yeshue replied quietly. Yue Chunqing wasn't a cruel person. His words were thoughtlessly blurted out of anger. After venting his emotions, he became somewhat calmer, and upon hearing the note of tearful despondence in Jiang Yeshua's voice, felt that he had probably spoken too harshly. He glanced furtively at Jiang Yeshue, but his eyes quickly darted away in distaste. At this strained moment, the shopkeeper returned from the inner room with 2 bottles of pine oil. The Yue clan were important customers for this general goods store, so he didn't even hand the oil to Jiang Yeshue before he rushed to greet Yue Chunqing with a greasy smile. Oh, hello? Hold on. Okay. Everybody's still here, right? My monitor's just disconnected, but I don't think it actually affected the stream. Sorry. And I lost where I was. So he didn't even hand the oil to Jiang Yeshue before he rushed to greet Yue Chunqing with a greasy smile. Oh, an honored guest, young Yue Gongzi. Come, please take a seat. Yue Manor's orders arrived quite a while ago. Please wait. I'll call someone to get them for you right away. This was the perfect excuse for Yue Chunqing to turn his back on Jiang Yeshue. He walked up to the counter, produced a sheet of paper from within his robes, and cleared his throat. We need to add these items to the list, too. My papa and 4th uncle always need them, so deliver them with the rest, okay? Alrighty. The shopkeeper loved it when customers added items at the last minute. He took the paper and perused it with a smile. Suddenly, his smile froze. Yue Chunqing was leaning comfortably over the counter, propped up on his elbows. What is it? Are you out of stock again? How come you're always out of stock? Yue Chunqing asked, somewhat irked. 4th uncle thinks I'm useless whenever I can't get everything he asked for. He was pretty displeased last time, and if it's the same again today, then he'll... Yue Chunqing's hair stood on end at the very thought. He shuddered. I'd better go to a different shop. The shopkeeper instantly grew anxious. Ah, no, he cried. Young Gongzi, you've misunderstood. A few of the items need to be checked over in inventory, that's all. Please take a seat. All the items you requested will be ready shortly. He turned and called behind him. Adu, come here. The shop assistant diligently scurried forward. The shopkeeper pulled him into a back room and whispered something in his ear. By the time the shopkeeper emerged again, he had a warm and friendly smile on his face once more. Young Yue Gongzi, please come with me to the rear courtyard to take a look at the goods. If you're satisfied with everything, I'll load the carriage and deliver it all to the manor as soon as possible. Yue Chunqing seized the opportunity to get away from Jiang Yeshue and followed the shopkeeper without another word. His silhouette disappeared behind the curtain. It would not be appropriate for Moshi to comment on other people's family matters, so he said nothing. Jiang Yeshue cast his eyes down to the floor, his thin, frail frame cutting an unremarkable figure in the corner where he stood. He strove to appear unbothered, but the dejection and embarrassment on his face were not easily hidden. After the shopkeeper left with Yue Chunqing, his assistant Adu emerged from the inner hall holding 2 bottles of oil. He handed them to Jiang Yeshue. Begging your pardon for the wait, Qingchu Elder. Here are the 2 jugs of tongue oil. Please take care. Jiang Yeshue blinked in surprise. What? The 2 jugs of tongue oil that you requested? Take care. But I asked for pine oil. The expression of supposed shock on Adu's face was clumsy as could be. Is that so? He stammered. He was probably unused to lying, and flushed red halfway through his sentence. The shopkeeper clearly said tongue oil. Could I have misheard? Jiang Yeshue was still perplexed. Then I'll have to trouble you to exchange it. Adu winced. Ah, you want pine oil? Our pine oil is all sold out today. How about you come another? The assistant was interrupted by a deep, cold voice. How many times do you want him to make the trip on those legs of his? It was Moshi, emerging from behind the other two men and leveling a harsh look at the assistant. Shihajun. Moshi's gaze was incisive as he asked in frigid tones, was it that you misheard? Or was it that Yue Manor just so happened to need pine oil as well, so you sold it to them instead? The assistant didn't dare lie to Moshi, so his face only flushed redder as he tried to stall. By this time, Jiang Yeshue had realized what was going on. He sighed softly and said to Moshi, "It doesn't matter. My shop isn't too far from here anyway. I'll yield to Chun Qing so he doesn't have to run all over the place. It's too cold out, and coming here isn't easy for him. And I know Chuyi's temper." Gu Mong's eyes flitted back and forth as he watched this conversation from the sidelines. He reached up to touch the slave collar on his neck, perhaps recalling that Jiang Yeshue was a kind person who had given him his necklace. He ducked out of the room and darted into the garden without warning. Before anyone could stop him, he had pulled Yue Chunqing back into the shop. Yue Chunqing's small face was bright red from being dragged in by Gu Mong by the collar of his fur coat. "What are you doing?" he sputtered. "You little turtle, let go of me." Gu Mong didn't release Yue Chunqing until he had hauled him all the way over to Jiang Yeshue. "What are you doing?" Yue Chunqing whined, massaging his neck. "Want pine oil," Gu Mong parroted. "You want pine oil?" Gu Mong pointed at the embarrassed Jiang Yeshue. "He does. I don't." Yue Chunqing couldn't help but look at Jiang Yeshue, but almost immediately tore his gaze away again. "No, that's what my fourth uncle wants," he grumbled. Gu Mong said, "He was here first." Yue Chunqing fell silent. Clients who come first are served first. The shopkeeper had also rushed back into the room and was rendered helpless upon witnessing this scene. He smiled sheepishly, unsure of what to say. Yue Chunqing had finally gotten the gist of the situation. Being a reasonable person, he quickly turned to the shopkeeper, wide-eyed. "Shopkeeper, surely you couldn't have promised to sell the pine oil to him, then gone back on your word because you didn't want me to leave?" I didn't," the shopkeeper blurted out. "I just misheard." Yue Chunqing saw the shopkeeper panicking and saw what had happened clearly. "And now you're lying about it," he cried, enraged. "You big bad dog." Jiang Yeshue didn't like to cause trouble. He shook his head. "It's no problem. I'm not in a rush. Young Yue Gongzi, keep the oil. I'll be taking my leave." He leaned on his cane and lowered his head as he slowly made his way to the exit. After witnessing the man's repeated humiliations, Yue Chunqing stood rooted to the spot for a long interval, wearing an expression of blank discontent. When Jiang Yeshue reached the door, his conscience could finally bear no more. He shouted, "Hey!" The instant Yue Chunqing opened his mouth, he regretted it. Damn it, his papa, his uncle, and his fourth uncle all disliked this person. If they knew that Yue Chunqing had spoken to him, they might skin him alive. But Jiang Yeshue had already stopped in his tracks. Yue Chunqing had no choice but to brace himself and press on. You? Why do you want the pine oil?" "To make some talismans." "Oh." Yue Chunqing cocked his head. His curiosity got the better of him, and he asked, hesitant, when Li Qingqian was causing trouble, was it you who gave those talismans of indestructibility to the poor?" Jiang Yeshue said nothing. Embarrassed, Yue Chunqing shot him another glance. Finally, Jiang Yeshue sighed. It's cold out. You shouldn't be running all over the city. Get your shopping done and go home. Don't make your fourth uncle angry again. With that, he lifted the entrance curtain and walked out, leaving Yue Chunqing standing in a daze. Yue Chunqing caught Moshi's eye and mumbled, confused and hurt. Shihajun, I. These were the matters of the Yue clan. Moshi only shook his head in silence and followed Jiang Yeshue out of the shop. They accompanied Jiang Yeshue back to the forge. It was dusk when they parted ways. As they made their way home, Gumong suddenly asked, Moshi, that Jiang Yeshue, why did he let White Bird have the oil? White Bird? That guy who called me a little turtle. With a start, Moshi realized that Gumong was referring to Yue Chunqing, who had been wearing a thick white coat with a fur collar. Gumong must have thought he looked like a white bird. He explained, because Jiang Yeshue is his daga. If you're a daga, you have to let other people take your things? Moshi was silent for a spell. No, those other two people were important to him, so he let them have their way. Just like that Shixiang who let you eat roast goose? Moshi felt his heart thump. It took him a moment to respond. You think that Shixiang thought I was important? Gumong thought it over. Roast goose is tasty. He gave it to you. You are important. Moshi cast him a strange look and paused for a second before responding. Do you think the person who gave you the brocade pouch is important? Gumong responded instantly, yes. Moshi's face immediately darkened, and he snapped, Maybe you think he's important, but who's to say if he feels the same? I've sheltered you for this long, but I've yet to see anyone else in the capital show any concern for you. Gumong hung his head and fell silent. Moshi had been hurt, so he retaliated by striking back at the person who had hurt him. You just made it up in your head. You're so easily satisfied by a single brocade pouch. If that person really thought you were important, he would come looking for you. You've been in jeopardy so many times. He should have come to your rescue, did he? No, Gumong replied dully. So he didn't, yet you're still convinced he's important. He's important. Who gave him the brocade pouch? I need to know. Moshi looked at him for a moment. Then he sneered with a hint of resentment. Fascinating. Which honored hero is he? Why don't you introduce him to me? This time, Gumong desolately shook his head. He lowered his lashes and didn't argue, looking somewhat wounded. The dispute had disheartened them both, so neither spoke as they walked along side by side. Only when they neared the city center did Moshi finally speak to Gumong again. Put your hood up. There are too many eyes and ears here. Gumong obeyed. While they walked, Moshi still felt annoyance as he ruminated on Gumong's words. He stopped to buy a cup of cold tea when they passed a tea stall and stepped aside to drink it. Gradually, the whispering that had surrounded them as they walked grew louder. Ayah, look, it's Shihajun. My husband, wah! No way, clearly he's my husband. This was the imperial capital. Though the city teemed with glittering nobles, and Moshi himself was no hermit, the maidens passing by still couldn't resist sneaking look after look as soon as they caught sight of him. Moshi was very fetching, his lips especially so. Although they were thin, their shape was sensual, and their color was the perfect hue to inspire in any bystander an involuntary urge to kiss them. Unfortunately, despite being born with such alluring, kissable lips, he had a gaze as cold as permafrost, and looked at everyone with an expression of impatience, a perfect picture of asceticism. Nevertheless, he couldn't extinguish the maiden's covetous looks. On top of that, a certain idea had begun to spread throughout Changhua at some point. Everyone said Shihajun seemed so coldly aloof and arrogant, but if you looked at his broad shoulders, slender waist, and long legs, and the ruthless dominance he exuded when his temper exploded, my, you could imagine the kind of all-consuming ecstasy he could fuck someone into. Take, for example, the crowd of beautiful ladies that had congregated on the second floor of a brothel on this street. Their clients only visited at night, so they lazed around during the day. Presently, they happened to be eating snacks and chatting on the balcony. Upon catching sight of Mo Shi, they descended into a flurry of whispers. "I'm telling you, this man wouldn't be at all refined in bed," the brothel madam mused aloud as she spat melon seeds and waved a round gauze fan. The maidens surrounding her all burst into giggles. One girl piped up, "Mother, you don't know what you're talking about. Shihajun maintains abstinence and never goes to brothels. How would you know what he's like in bed?" "Hush. You all are too young. You haven't seen enough of the world. I may not be good at much, but I've got one hell of an eye for men." She pointed a sly finger at her girls and joked, "If you ever got the opportunity to sleep with him, I'm afraid he'd take a few decades off your life." Considering this, those hedonistic girls laughed all the more merrily. "Mother, I'd love nothing more than for him to wreck me." "You say that now." The madam rolled her eyes, waving her fan toward Mo Shi's distant silhouette. "Look at his legs, his shoulders and back, his waist. Do you think he's anything like the weak and sickly Wang Shujun? If you really took him to bed, he'd fuck you until you couldn't catch enough breath to cry. That's still better than weaklings who finish in 2 strokes." They're like a reader insert and also a self-insert, I think. Their words grew more obscene as they continued. Their faces were lovely as flowers, and this juxtaposition with their coarse language created an indescribable sense of tragedy. They all knew that good men would not be sleeping in their beds. All the sincere and tender sentiments held in their hearts could only be offered to the old, the ugly, or the callous men who came to call. In the end, those men's wives would hate them, and the daughters of pristine families would disdain them. Even as they laughed, their words slowly faltered. One of the girls watching Mo Shi from afar let out a soft sigh. She said nothing more, and her sisters around her all gradually lapsed into silence. Among the handsome men of the world, those too open with their affections weren't tempting enough, and those too reserved weren't alluring enough. However, men like Mo Shi, who were clearly possessed of fiery tempers and passions, yet remained honorable and proper, cool and composed, were precisely the type that girls yearned for. But to whom did his heart belong? "I really envy Princess Mengzi," a songstress murmured, hiding her mouth behind a fan. "In all of Changhua, who doesn't envy Princess Mengzi?" replied another girl. "A good birthright is what it is. Forget everyone else who likes her. I heard Shihajun will marry no other. He's just waiting for her health to improve, and then he'll take her as his wife. Ayah, it truly makes me jealous as hell." "Hey, wait a second, who else likes her? Tell us, tell us." All those noble young masters do. Jinyun Jun, Fengya Jun, Wangshu Jun. Pfft, no way Wangshu Jun does. He only loves himself. I heard that Gumong used to like her too. Okay. That's information. That's nonsense for sure. Gumong liked everyone and never stayed long with anyone. At the mention of those old stories about Gumong, the women grew excited, and a vivaciously pretty girl spoke up. On that subject, Mother, I've heard it said that Gumong was quite fond of you back when you were with the army. The girls all started giggling again. Their madam used to be one of the top courtesans in Chonghua. Brash and stubborn, she had earned the nickname Hua Jiao Little Peppercorn. At present, she was only in her early 30s, and her furious gaze was still quite piquant. Making fun of me again? Why bring me into it? She snapped. Come on, I'm just curious. Mother, why don't you teach us your tricks? That's right. If not for Mother's skill, General Gu wouldn't have been interested. The madam rolled her eyes. Gumong? Forget about him. He was a fickle lout who'd have a new girl on his arm every few days. Who wants to talk about him? She paused. If he hadn't fallen out with his Imperial Majesty and turned traitor, if he were still that glorious, renowned General Gu, I bet he would have had his fun with each of you in turn. After a moment's thought, she added derisively, what a playboy. None of these women knew that the playboy she spoke of was the hooded man standing obediently at Moshi's side. As Gumong watched Moshi drink his third bowl of cold tea, he piped up, Are you going to have more? Moshi gave him a frigid look. What do you want? It's night. Dinner time, said Gumong. This man had become quite demanding. Moshi was still upset. Go ask your honorable pouch giver. I'm asking you, Gumong insisted stubbornly. Moshi had finally reached his breaking point. He fumed, Do you think I'm your slave, to be called forth and sent back as you please? Unexpectedly, Gumong pointed to himself. I am the slave. You are the lord. Silence. But you aren't my lord, Gumong continued, some confusion appearing on his face. Zhang Yeshue said the back of the collar had to be carved with your name, but you said it didn't. Why? Moshi clenched his jaw. Because I don't want you. Oh boy. Gumong was dazed for a moment. He looked perplexed as he repeated, You don't want me. No one else wants me either. No one wants Gumong. So nobody wants Gumong? That's right, Moshi replied. He didn't understand. He was clearly the one saying hurtful and insulting things to Gumong, yet the one who felt worse and worse was himself. He returned the teacup to the stall owner. No one wants you. Let's go. Where are we going? Aren't you hungry? Moshi grumpily said. I'm taking you out to eat. Well, we're sending mixed messages here. Yeah, Blue, if he loves her so much, why doesn't he marry her now so he can take care of her in sickness and in health? I seriously keep wondering about Princess Muggs's sickness. I thought that somewhere in book 1, there was, like, a small hint that, like, Moshi had something to do with it, or that, like, something had happened to her, and he was, like, at fault for it, or felt like he had to take the blame for it. I don't remember, like, who said that, or when that was, but I remember something like that, so I'm just like, please, tell me what's going on here. Anyway, that was the end of the chapter, and we are at chapter 48, which is called The Truth Behind Flirtations. Also, yeah, um, things that you shouldn't say to someone who, like, has their souls broken and they think they're like a wolf and they've been disposed by everyone, you know? Changhua had seen a sudden period of growth over the past few years. All sorts of restaurants, big and small, had popped up in the capital like bamboo shoots sprouting after the rain. However, the place Moshi brought Gumong to was clearly an older establishment, the Soaring Swan. This restaurant had once been one of the finest in Chonghua's capital. In those days, only aristocrats could afford its shockingly high prices. But in recent years, the Soaring Swan's haughty attitude had softened, likely due to competition. This old swan had no choice but mimic the nearby songbirds that offered good food at cheap prices. The menu was no longer so outlandishly expensive, and ordinary cultivators could afford to dine here. Despite these changes, the old swan's time was slowly but surely ticking away. It was the dinner rush right now, yet the premises were desolate, with scant few carriages stopping outside. Moshi entered the restaurant with Gumong mindlessly trailing his every step. The owner, an obsequious, portly man with the surname Liu, rushed over at once. "Aya, Shiha-jun, long time no see. Here for dinner?" "A private room, please." "Of course. The old one?" Moshi paused. Proprietor Liu led them both up to the second floor and to a private room at the end of the corridor. Its delicate entrance curtain was crafted of tortoiseshell bamboo, and a thick carpet embroidered with celestial bodies covered the floor. Moshi still remembered the first time he'd brought Gumong to this room. After following Moshi through the door, Gumong had been stunned speechless by the sumptuous trappings of luxury. He'd spent an age gathering himself, only to ask, face ashen, "Just to double-check, Daga, are you paying? If not, I couldn't afford it even if you sold me." But like the restaurant's fame and glory, the carpet's once shimmering golden threads had been dulled by a layer of dust. Moshi flipped through the menu, but his thoughts were such a mess he couldn't focus on the words. In the end, he snapped the intricately embroidered menu shut and pushed it toward Gumong. "You choose." Gumong was still toying with the bronze plaque on his collar and started at the sound of Moshi's voice. "I can't read." "There are pictures. The scroll has been imbued with spiritual energy, so you can see how the dishes look." So Gumong opened the menu, holding it up as he perused it with care. "I want this one, and this one." He alternated between jabbing periodically at the menu and biting down on his finger in a daze. So hungry. Moshi was silent. He had turned his face away and was no longer looking at Gumong. When Gumong noticed this, he asked, "Are you still mad?" "No." Gumong thought for a moment and then said, "Don't be mad. You're also important." Moshi's heart pounded, but his expression was impassive as he replied coolly, "Why bother flattering me? I don't have a brocade pouch for you." Gumong smiled. "But you gave me a necklace." Silence. If the emotion in Moshi's eyes had been jealousy, most of it faded instantly at these words, darkening into sorrow. He glanced at the pitch-black slave collar on Gumong's neck and could not find the words or energy to reply. In the end, every twist of fate in his life had been tied to Gumong. Without the Gumong of yesteryear, the Moshi of the present wouldn't exist. If he cast aside the hatred of two warring nations, What could he hate Gumong for? When his family was tearing itself apart, it was Gumong who held out his hand to him. When he had no reputation to speak of, it was Gumong who kept him company. When he had been at his wit's end, it was Gumong who encouraged him with a smile. He owed him a debt of grace. Don't worry. Everything will be all right. How bad could it be? Even if your uncle screwed you over, you're still a noble. Look at me. I'm a slave and I'm not even worrying. So why are you? If there comes a day when your uncle really leaves you without a place to go, I'll give you half my room to live in and half my food to eat, okay? You still have me. How much had Gumong done for him? Back when Moshi's future had been uncertain, when he was being bullied in the military, Gumong had been the only person who cared about his feelings or whether he'd eaten his fill. Moshi was aloof and stubborn, and the aristocratic young masters he lived with all looked down on him. He had lost his father young, and his mother had remarried despite the scandal it sparked. If she had another child, Moshi's circumstances would become even worse. Those other nobles would sometimes toss Moshi's rations to the ground. Gumong, who couldn't bear to see this floundering young master bullied, always set aside some of his own food for Moshi. But the rations slave cultivators received were quite unappetizing, and though Moshi never complained, Gumong could tell that Moshi merely endured them. Thus, Gumong came up with a plan. Every few days, he'd beg cash from his buddies, telling them he needed to buy makeup and accessories for a girl. Then he'd quietly buy his shudi a few treats to cheer the poor thing up. At that time, everyone in the troop said Gumong was too fickle, and his buddies heckled him for his unfaithfulness. 2 days ago, he wanted to buy a jade pin for Xiaolan. Today, he's here looking for money again, saying he wants to buy a flower pin for Xiaodie. Ah, the skirt-chasing scoundrel. Lu Jianxing, Gumong's best friend back then, had asked, Amang, what happened to you? You never used to be so extravagant. Did you go wild after joining the army? Gumong responded by shamelessly sticking his hand out. Bro, could you spare me some coin? I'll do your laundry for a month. Who's caught your eye now? Lu Jianxing exclaimed. Gumong made up a name on the spot. Old Wang's daughter from the next village over. Lu Jianxing stared. She's only 6. You're insane. That was, yeah, that's why you shouldn't just, make up random people's daughters that you don't know. No one knew the truth. No one knew that the deranged spendthrift skirt chaser Gumong was using the excuse of visiting brothels to slip away to the closest city and wash dishes for a rundown restaurant. He'd disguise himself with a spell and change his clothes so no one could tell he was an officer from the garrison troops. He washed mountains of soup and rice bowls with such enthusiasm that even the proprietor stared in admiration. Young man, why don't you come work here full time? I'll keep paying you this much. Even under his disguise, Gumong's eyes were still bright as the stars on a summer's night. Thank you, sir, but I can't abandon my other responsibilities. Oh, that's a pity. The proprietor patted him on the head. It's rare to see such a hard-working youth. Moshi's Gu Shixiang suffered in secret and exhausted himself in silence, all to take care of him. And Moshi had no clue what he did, not until he saw his comrade's blood-stained letter and realized he was in love with this man 3 years his senior. At that time, Moshi had charged through the snow, seized by an irrepressible need to find Gumong and confess his feelings. However, when he arrived, Lu Jianxing was the only one in the tent. Gumang? They dragged him out to the brothel in the city, Lu Jianxing had told him. You know what they say, youth isn't meant for abstinence, ha ha ha. In that instant, Moshi felt as if he'd been dealt a sharp blow. He struggled to rescue his calm, but failed to control his feelings. He leapt onto a horse and sped to the brothel Lu Jianxing had named, but only found a few of Gumong's friends there. Gumong himself was nowhere in sight. His chest burned with an unstoppable fire. Refusing to give up, he searched every shop in the nearby village, going through them one by one. At last, he found the alleged brothel-goer Gumong in the kitchen of a little restaurant. Gumong was cloaked in an illusion spell, so Moshi shouldn't have been able to identify him. But he kept careful watch, and when Gumong looked up from the washing basin, Moshi caught his eye. In that single glance, Moshi recognized his Gu Shiga. Moshi's heart, which had ricocheted between the disappointment of hearing Gumong went to a brothel to the shock of seeing Gumong elbows deep in a pile of dishes, was devastated. Suddenly, he had no idea how to confess his feelings. His chest roiled with passion, and even the gaze he directed at Gumong was scorching. But impulses start off potent, and wane as time passes and consideration sets in. When Moshi had first thought to confess, he didn't find Gumong in the tent. When he angrily rushed to the brothel intent on dragging him out, he again didn't find Gumong. Now that he had finally found him, that uncontrollable fervor was no longer so urgent. He caught his breath in the wind-blown snow, then strode to the latticed door and flung it open, sending the chicks in the courtyard into a frenzy with the commotion. He walked straight toward the bewildered Gumong. He saw Gumong's hands submerged in the water. If he wished to avoid exposing himself as a cultivator, Gumong couldn't use magic, and it was a cold winter. His fingers were red and swollen. Moshi felt a sudden lump in his throat. When he thought about his own status at the time, he didn't know what right he had to speak those words of confession, what right he had to ask even more of Gumong. He yanked Gumong off the little stool without a word. Lowering his long lashes, he cupped Gumong's freezing hands in his own. He held his Shiga's hands and rubbed them between his palms. "Doesn't it hurt?" he murmured. But Gumong grinned and shrugged it off. "What's a little frostbite? That's nothing. Men look better a little rough around the edges." Gumong scratched his head with hands swollen as radishes, the tip of a sharp canine showing in his grin. "Your Gumong Guga is the handsomest." It was a ridiculous sentiment. No one would find a pair of hands like frozen radishes handsome. But what did Gumong care? What he meant was, since you're in the army, in the same troop as me, and you're my Shidi, I can't let you be wronged. It wasn't as if Moshi had never tried to dissuade Gumong. He'd told Gumong that he was being too generous, and that Moshi's future was uncertain. This grace might not be something he could repay. But army ruffian Gu Shishang only laughed, his long lashes frosted over in the cold night. "Who said anything about repayment? You're in my squadron, and you're my brother, so I need to protect you. But enough with the buts. If it really bothers you, make note of everything you owe me in a scroll, and return it all with interest once you've made your mark." Gumong ruffled Moshi's hair with a smile. "Io, my precious princess is such a finicky little fool." Moshi watched that youthful and lively grin widen in the glow of the light. Right then and there, he secretly decided he would repay Gumong with the best of everything he had, and more. He would seek out the rarest treasures and the most splendid finery and give them all to him. He wanted to take care of this man for a lifetime. But what happened in the end? Gumong had given Moshi salvation, and Moshi repaid him with that pitch-black lock around his neck. And the last bit of irony to top it all off, this was the best he could give Gumong. After experiencing the kind of betrayal and hatred he had, after his heart had frozen like cold steel, this was the last thing he could give him. So this was the lifetime they'd share. Ouch. Yep. Everyone's crying in the club right now. The dishes had been ordered. Moshi continued to sit silently, arms crossed as his mind wandered. "You're still unhappy," Gumong said. Moshi glanced at him. "I swear I'm not." Gumong persisted. "Why are you unhappy?" Silence. "Is it because you don't like it here? We can go somewhere else." Moshi sighed, extricating himself from his memories. "Why would we go somewhere else? The food here is really good. You used to have a few favorite dishes, but I don't know if you ordered them." "My favorites from before?" Gumong murmured. "Like I said, we used to know each other." Gumong thought this over as best he could before giving up. "Sure, if you say so." This restaurant had many Shu-style dishes, but Gumong was no stranger to chokingly spicy food. Western Shu was one of Chonghua's allies, and Gumong had once traveled there to assist their military when war ravaged the country. And there is a footnote. Western Shu is modern-day Sichuan province. Before then, he'd been someone who couldn't bear the tiniest hint of spice, but that trip had transformed him into someone who could down a plateful of chili pepper chicken, doused in red oil, without the slightest change in expression. But could was not the same as would. Moshi knew Gumong still preferred local cuisine. In those years, when Gumong had defected to the Liao kingdom, Moshi wondered if he ever saw the grape wines on the table and missed the steamed buns and meat pies of his homeland, whether he ever regretted it, if only just a little. In contrast with Chonghua's typically mild fare, everything about this restaurant was intense. The kitchen was in plain sight, separated from the dining area by a cloth curtain. The guests on the lower floor could hear the furious sizzle of oil and the crisp sounds of spatulas striking pans. From time to time, gouts of flame would flare up from the woks, casting a crimson glow over the entire kitchen. The waiter brought over a dish in each hand, and another balanced on his head. Yuxiang eggplant, cold-tossed chicken, a basket of guo kui flatbreads. And there's a footnote for Yuxiang eggplant. Literally, fish fragrant, Yuxiang seasoning contains no fish, despite its name. It typically includes fermented spicy bean paste, garlic, ginger, soy sauce, black vinegar, sugar, salt, and chili peppers. Meat Bun is here, making us feel hungry again. Gentlemen, please enjoy your meal while it's hot. It won't taste as good cold. Gumong reached out and silently lifted the bamboo basket from the server's head. The flatbreads were kneaded with lard and filled with meat. The dough was stuffed with minced pork, ground peppercorns, and glistening tender green onions. The pancakes were brushed on both sides with lard and baked in a furnace. Even from within the basket, they gave off a delicious aroma of char. Gumong wasn't fond of green onion, but after he had removed all the offending pieces, he found the pancake very much to his liking, carefully clasping it in his hands as he took bite after bite. The rest of the dishes arrived one by one. The glossy, twice-cooked pork trembled delicately and shimmered between their chopsticks. The tender hearts of the boiled cabbage were soaked in rich chicken broth, leaving behind a refreshing, lingering sweetness. The stir-fried pork kidneys had been scored such that the slices of meat curled charmingly when seared over high heat with garlic shoots. The scent of the kitchen's smoky blaze still wreathed the dish when it was brought out, the texture both tender and crisp. The flavors of these dishes were simple yet fierce. A single bite was enough to clear one's head. The numbing spice of the peppercorns made the tongue and nose tingle. None of the dishes on this table used costly ingredients, but they were still incredibly delicious. The expense of them was in the exquisite skill of the cooks, which had been the reason for this restaurant's exorbitantly high prices in the past. Yum, Gumong said, then mumbled to himself. It feels like I've eaten it before? Sorry, I looked ahead for a second. It feels like I've eaten it before. At this, Moshi's already lukewarm appetite cooled yet further. He set down his chopsticks and turned to look out the window at the streets and paths below. Gumong licked his lips. What's wrong, princess? It took a moment for Moshi to register those words. His head snapped up. What did you call me? That's the end of the chapter. And, I guess we're gonna take a break. I think I'm just gonna take like a 5-minute break. 5, 6, whatever minutes. And when we come back, we're gonna be on page 179 for chapter 49, which is called Hate You. I don't like the sound of that, but I do like the sound of him calling Moshi princess. So, I will be right back. Oh wait, Blue Meat Bun said she wrote most of the food descriptions while imagining what she wanted to eat because she was hungry. That makes perfect sense. Good to know. Alright, I will be right back, y'all. Hello, I'm back. Lolly, him calling Moshi princess adds 10 years to my lifespan and takes away 10 years at the same time, if that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. That's also how I feel. Moshi is princess. I love that he called him that. That's amazing. Well, we are on page 179, and this chapter is called Hate You. And I hate that. Moshi's abrupt change in expression frightened Gumong. He hesitated before answering. Princess? Moshi felt like all the blood in his body had rushed to his head. This single word was like a boulder crashing into the ocean, making his head ring so thunderously that it took him a moment to speak again. Why did I what? Moshi's fingertips felt cold. He desperately grabbed the teacup on the table, which barely concealed his trembling, as he asked hoarsely, "Why did you call me that?" "Oh, it's what Li Wei taught me." He said princess means someone very respected and high up. Someone who should be properly cared for. Gumong smiled. "I think you're just like that." A long silence ensued. "What's wrong?" Gumong asked. It was like Moshi had fallen off the edge of a cliff to the bottom of a gorge. His trembling continued, but his excitement instantly cooled. He gritted his teeth and turned away. Nothing. Seconds went by, and still Gumong looked perplexed. Moshi closed his eyes, and finally managed to scrape away the anguish hidden in his heart. He raspily changed the subject. "Drink your cabbage soup. Don't worry about me." Gumong peered at the boiled Napa cabbage in his bowl. "But the soup is gone." Moshi made no reply. Gumong's gaze flitted around the table and landed on the bowl of peppercorn meatball soup in front of Moshi. "You want to try mine?" Moshi asked. Gumong nodded. Moshi was in a mood, but it was a complex one. He didn't really want to get angry. He pushed the soup bowl toward Gumong. "There are whole peppercorns in here. They have a very strong flavor. Be careful." Gumong took the bowl and tore his last flatbread into pieces, dipping them in the bowl to eat. He blew on the soup and used a spoon to carefully avoid the curled-up peppercorn husks, but inevitably, one slipped through his defenses and trespassed in his mouth. He didn't react at first, and even crunched the shell between his teeth. The consequences were just as expected. An instant later, Gumong spat out the peppercorn shell, tearing up, his tongue red and stinging from the numbing spice. He shoved the bowl of soup away. "It's poisonous." Moshi was taken aback at first. Wasn't Gumong able to handle spicy food? But he quickly realized that Gumong had developed his spice tolerance later in life. Before, he wouldn't touch any food with the slightest hint of red. When the Liao Kingdom broke his mind, they'd probably reset all of his acquired tolerances as well. This realization made Moshi's anxiety worse. Even now, he still harbored a sliver of hope that all of Gumong's bewilderment was feigned. But in all the days they'd spent together, Gumong's every move told him otherwise. The former beast of the altar had died. All Moshi could have or hate or lash out at was the handful of embers before him. Ouch. Moshi watched him in exasperation. "There's no poison." Gumong stuck out his tongue, chagrin written all over his face. "I've been poisoned." There was no point in trying to explain. so Moshi poured him a cup of cold jasmine tea. If you drink this slowly, it'll cure the poison. Gumong apprehensively accepted the cup of tea and sipped it with a frown. Better now? Gumong nodded and looked hesitantly at the table laden with food. I'm not eating anymore. Just don't eat the dishes that are poisoned. Gumong pouted. This place is no good. Let's not come back. Moshi looked at Gumong's lips, bright red from the spice. An indescribable impulse surged in his heart. Gumong, he said abruptly. This was where I treated someone to a meal for the first time. Do you know who that person was? Gumong thought it over. Me? Moshi's eyes brightened for a moment, but then he saw the confusion in Gumong's eyes and heard the question in his tone. Did I guess right? Moshi said no more. He silently closed his eyes and let out a soft sigh, leaving the question unanswered. In the evening, after they finished their meal, these two old friends-turned-enemies strolled along the shore of Yanzhu Lake. Red lanterns hung over the bridge, casting a rosy glow as gentle as a dream over the water's surface. Boats slid past to anchor for the night. With the strike of a wooden oar, the dream shattered into glimmering fragments of light. This is just cruel and unusual. I agree. Gumong walked by Moshi's side. Moshi had bought him a steamed bun filled with chicken, pork, and bamboo shoots, a local specialty, and Gumong was tearing through it with gusto. Moshi stopped walking and stared at the surface of the water. After a long while, as though still clutching at that last kernel of hope, but also as though mumbling without a care, he said, If Lu Jianxing hadn't died, would you still have gone to such lengths? What lengths? Moshi watched the reflections in the water. It's nothing. It's fine even if you've forgotten it all. As long as you're alive, there's still a chance things will change. Why, The madam at Loame Pavilion told me I could say to agree with other people. If I agree, people will be happy. Why bother trying to make me happy? Moshi asked after a pause. Gumong took another bite of his bun. Because you're a good person. Moshi stared at him in shock, then coldly retorted, You really don't know how to read people. Gumong swallowed, his eyes pure and guileless, as he gazed at Moshi, who stood amid the glowing lanterns and splashing oars. A pause. Could you not do that? Especially with something like this? Forget it. After a beat, Moshi turned back to face Gumong, thoroughly vexed. How am I good? Hold on. As Gumong spoke, he stepped closer to Moshi, sniffing like a puppy at his face, neck, and ears. If Moshi's female admirers could have seen this, they would no doubt have been stupefied. The cold and aloof Shihajun actually letting someone get this close and act in a manner so strange and intimate? Didn't he usually throw people onto their backs and break their ribs? But they only knew part of the story. Moshi certainly didn't like being touched by strangers, but Gumong was clearly an exception. Part of it was because he was so naive now. Everything he did was born of a childlike instinct with no other motivations. If he was curious about something, he would put it in his mouth for a taste. If he wanted to understand something, he would move closer for a sniff. But the other reason was that Moshi and Gumong had been inseparable since long, long ago. He had long grown used to him. There's a kind of smell on you, Gumong finally said. Different from other people. What smell? Moshi looked at him. Gumong shook his head. I don't know, but... He paused, as if trying and failing to dredge an appropriate description from his sorry brain. Very sweet. You smell like a spoonful of honey. It was clear that Moshi didn't want to continue this bizarre conversation. What else? He asked. Gumong held out the remaining half of the bun. Only you would buy me this. He looked at Moshi, puzzled. Why do you care so much? Moshi blinked, slightly startled. Was that written so vividly on his face? In the light of the lanterns reflected on the water, Gumong looked at him with those large, elegant eyes, ever so calm and peaceful. Moshi shook his head and didn't answer the question. He only said, You're the second person on Earth to say I'm good. Who's the first? Moshi gazed at him. Also you. Gumong was stunned. There's two of me? A pause. That's not what I meant. Forget it. Telling you is a waste of time anyway. Gumong's shock dissipated. Then you should go ask some other people. Many of them will also tell you you're good. There was no one else he could ask. It had been a long time since he had allowed himself to speak his mind to someone else, or allowed anyone to share their innermost thoughts with him. Every person who had tried to get close to him had been pushed away by his icy detachment and bone-chilling coldness. I wonder who that sounds like. Moshi thought of himself in his youth, of Gumong washing dishes in that little restaurant, of the late emperor, of Mengzi. He thought of those bygone battle fires at Dongting Lake, and of kneeling in front of Gumong like a beggar, pleading with him to turn back. The old scar on his chest started to ache dully. Those who had betrayed him, and those he had betrayed, all seemed to be washed away in the limpid waters of Yanzhi Lake. He closed his eyes. For some reason, his heart throbbed bitterly. When he spoke again, even he was frightened by the hoarseness of his voice. Gumong, did you know? There are actually many secrets between us that I've never told anyone else. He fell silent. He hadn't done this kind of thing in almost 10 years. The words lodged in his throat, unable to pass the barrier of his teeth. Slowly, the impulse faded. He was like a vengeful ghost punished by having his tongue torn out. He could only swallow his bitterness back into his gut. He'd already grown used to it. At this point, Gumong suddenly spoke. Don't say it. I'm not listening. Moshi looked up. Why? Gumong brushed away strands of stray hair that the night wind had blown into his eyes. He leaned against one of the bridge's wooden pillars and looked up at Moshi. Because you don't really want to tell me. If I really knew you, then I might remember it myself in the future. So there's no point. He covered his ears. I'm not listening. Moshi looked at Gumong, standing there with his hands clapped over his ears. After a beat of silence, he broke into laughter. It was his first true laugh in a long time, one that was genuine rather than scornful, taunting, perfunctory, or insincere. Moshi laughed long and hard, his back pressed to a wooden pillar. As Gumong watched him, he slowly pulled his hands away from his ears and then raised them, this time, to touch Moshi's face. His fingers were cold. For this, Moshi ought to have sharply rebuked him and pulled away. But against the backdrop of glowing lanterns and softly splashing oars, amid this anguish that had tormented him all day, or perhaps not just today, but ever since Gumong's defection, his lashes fluttered slightly, but he couldn't say anything harsh. Wetness gathered at the corners of his eyes. "Princess," Gumong murmured, and then said, inexplicably, "Can I have your name on the back of the plaque?" "Because I seem to be a good person?" He didn't expect Gumong to shake his head. "No," he said. "Because I think I really did know you." Moshi felt like sharp talons had wrapped around his heart. Even breathing hurt. Gumong said, "I don't know what a lord is, but it sounds okay. I want it to be you." Moshi stared at him, his feelings impossible to describe. His heart was filled with a melange of emotions, piquant and volatile. He summoned all his restraint to say, quiet and slow, "You're far from worthy." What does worthy mean? Moshi tried another tack. "What I mean is, you can't." Gumong thought it over. "Then what do I do to become worthy?" Moshi couldn't respond. He stared at Gumong and only asked, "Can't you tell that I hate you?" "What's hate?" Gumong asked, lost. "Look into my eyes." "I hate that I can't drink your blood, tear off your skin, and torture you to the brink with my own hands, make you suffer until you beg for death." Moshi stared at him coldly as he enunciated each word. "That's hate." Gumong stared hard into his eyes. They were very close, their eyes fixed on one another's, their breaths mingling. Moshi found it inappropriate and was about to push him away when he heard Gumong say, "But you look like you're in pain, like it really hurts." "Hating me? It hurts you?" That's the end of that chapter. Blue, I needed your comment. Why is Moshi the one who has the omega smell? Okay. Okay. I was thinking the chapter title was going to be sort of deceiving. And then I was like, Moshi, way to ruin the moment. Okay, we're at chapter 50, which is called Accompany Me. The speaker of those words did not take them to heart, but the listener did. Moshi shut his eyes. He felt as if a phantom knife had pierced his vitals, filling his chest with blood that splattered across the ground. Since Gumong had returned to Changhua, he had only seen people with hateful, furious, and cruel expressions on their faces. He'd never seen anyone look at him the way Moshi did. "I'm sorry," he blurted. "I won't ask you to be my lord anymore. Don't be sad." Moshi said nothing. "Don't hate me. If you stop hating me, will you stop hurting?" Delicate lines rippled over the lake's surface, the shattered motes of reflected light like a sky full of flickering stars. "Too late," Moshi rasped, seemingly an age later. "Gumong, one day, you will die a justified death by my hand. I've sworn it." "Don't say that." He turned around, his handsome features hazy and indistinct beneath the unsteady light of the red lanterns. "I was never a good person. It's just that Shuxiong forgot." At this, Gumong immediately swallowed the rest of his bun and began patting himself down. Confused, Moshi asked, "What are you doing?" After Gumong had run his hands over all his clothes, he raised his head to say, "It's dry." Then he reached for Moshi's hands. wanting him to feel it for himself. Of course, Moshi refused and shook off his grasp. He asked with a frown, "What do you think you're doing?" "Huh. My chest isn't wet at all, so why did you call me Shishong?" There is a footnote. Shishong, or wet chest, sounds just like Shishong, senior marshal brother. Moshi blinked, dumbfounded. In any case, Moshi meant what he said. He had never been perfectly good. Far from it. He had rash ambition and reckless impulses, and had gone through phases of reserve as well as abandon. Gumong had personally witnessed it all and forgiven it. But this present Gumong had buried their past. Moshi was the one standing in this besieged city, all alone, filled with resentment because he couldn't tear himself free. As they walked home that day, Moshi told Gumong, "I've committed many wrongs." But when Gumong asked him what they were, he fell silent. He used to love Gumong, so he had always refrained from doing anything that would disappoint him. Up to the day Gumong had admitted to his face that he'd turned traitor, Moshi hadn't actually hated him. And he hadn't truly committed many misdeeds, as he claimed. When it came to Gumong, there was only one thing that he truly considered a mistake, and that was falling in love with him. That was an unforgivable crime that he had still chosen to commit, over and over again. He was like an idiot beyond saving, angrily reminding himself he could never again make the same mistake while continuing to hang himself again and again on the same tree. That night, Moshi lay in bed, staring dry-eyed at the swirling patterns on his curtains and thinking, why not just kill Gumong in a single strike? Why not make a clean cut and be done with it? What was he pushing himself like this for? It was only later that he realized he hoped Gumong would remember the past. Not just so Gumong could answer for his betrayal, and not just so Moshi could hear Gumong repent or see Gumong shed tears. He still wanted Gumong to come and ask him about some of the secrets known only to the two of them. Even if Gumong ranted and raved at him, even if they had to spill one another's blood and fight to the death once more, it would at least be better than the state of things now, where Moshi alone had to shoulder the memories of two. Gumong, a sigh so soft it was barely audible, drifted from beneath the bed's canopy. In the end, you're the heartless one. Blue, I should make some meat buns just so I can chomp on them to vent my frustrations. Yeah, I need to do that too. And Henry, it also... Moshi is sadly predictable sometimes. Like, we all knew he was going to be like, my one mistake was you. I mean, he already said that before, but, you know. And so time passed, just like this. Moshi was constantly on guard, but he never found any sign that Gumong was faking his condition, and his hopes gradually faded. As he began to give up, his irritation with Gumong grew. The kiss-up Li Wei observed. Before, whenever Gumong showed up, the Lord's eyes would be locked right on him. But now, whenever Gumong shows up, the Lord turns away first. He concluded, the Lord is frustrated indeed. Li Wei hardly needed to say it. All of Shiha Manor could feel Moshi's frustration. It was said that repression made people go crazy. Moshi's anger had been repressed for a long time, and the criticisms he heaped on Gumong gradually grew crazier. Why must you eat with your hands? Has no one ever taught you to use chopsticks? If you don't know how to wash clothes, Then how do you know how to put them on? Li Wei's taught you how to make lotus root porridge 3 times, yet you still can't tell the difference between the salt and the sugar jars. Are you blind or is your tongue broken? The miscellaneous chores thrown at Gumong grew more and more numerous, while the standards demanded became higher and higher. The more hopeless Moshi felt about Gumong recovering his memories, the more impatient he became. By the end, even Moshi's personal servants found it outrageous. Even though the Lord's always walking around like a thundercloud, he wouldn't go off on us for no reason, and he'd never make things harder for us on purpose. But when it comes to Gumong... looks like Gumong really pisses him off. Some days later, Moshi's personal servants found themselves completely idle. This was not because of anything they had said or done, but because that twisted Shihajun had already assigned every last one of their duties to Gumong. One had to admit that Gumong was very clever. Although his mind had been damaged, his capabilities remained intact. After a month, he was able to properly and neatly handle all the chores that Li Wei had taught him. On top of that, he was physically strong and a fast worker, and didn't complain when he was assigned the work of 10. He never even whined about being tired. When the servants gathered, they gossiped about him nonstop. Look at the damned life he's living. He has to wake up at midnight to chop the firewood, and light the cooking fires, and make breakfast before dawn. Once the Lord wakes, he has to tidy up the room, and no matter how well he cleans, he suffers a round of scolding afterward. After that, he eats breakfast, only to be yelled at again while he eats. Then, when the Lord goes to court, he has to wash the clothes and hang them up to dry, then scrub the floors in the main hall, the reception pavilion, and the dining hall until they shine, then feed the fish and weed the back garden, then prepare dinner. My God, I wonder how he feels. How did he feel? No one would believe it if he said so, but Gumong didn't actually feel a damn thing. His vocabulary was so pitiful that when Moshi shouted at him, he could only understand simple phrases like, "Are you a pig?" On top of that, his obliviousness to social mores meant he didn't realize there was anything to be upset about. Because of his beastly nature, he considered things as an animal would. Even though Moshi always looked mean when he talked to him, and spoke quickly and impatiently whenever he started ranting, Gumong didn't dislike him. After all, Moshi gave him good food every day. In Gumong's eyes, Shiha Manor was like a wolf pack's territory. Moshi was very strong. Every day, he would venture out to earn his official's salary. This official's salary could be exchanged for food, items, and clothing, so Gumong felt that Moshi was a wolf with excellent hunting skills who was just a bit too fond of howling. However, since he was so capable, Gumong decided not to look down on him for it. Roles and duties were very clear-cut within the wolf pack. If Moshi needed to go out and hunt, and he told Gumong to stay within the territory to patrol, clean up, and do the washing, well, that was reasonable. Cooking was a rather complicated task, and he'd needed 10 or so days to learn all the words on the labels of those bottles and jars, but he was still quite pleased with himself. Now, not only did he know how to write the words sugar and salt, but also rice, flour, and oil. Gumong felt that these were amazing accomplishments, and it was all thanks to Moshi's howling. As for vinegar and soy sauce, those words were too hard. He didn't know them, and he had no plans to learn. The scent of vinegar was so strong he wrinkled his nose as soon as he smelled it. He knew he would never mistake it for anything else in this lifetime. Every day, he and Moshi shared the spoils of Moshi's hunts. Gradually, Gumong came to think of Moshi as a companion, and every time Moshi cursed and shouted at him, he felt inwardly anxious, though he didn't say anything. He knew that irritable wolves were more likely to fall into traps, and besides, if they got too angry, their fur could fall out. If they lost too much fur, they would easily fall sick, and if they got sick, they would easily die. He didn't want Moshi to die, because Moshi was the only person in Chonghua willing to share his prey with him. There were many times when he wanted to comfort Moshi so he would be less angry, but he went round and round Moshi without figuring out a way to calm him. In the end, all he could do was stand off to the side, listening as Moshi cursed him out while praying for Moshi's longevity. Only like this would he have food to eat. Such were Gumong's thoughts. Fortunately, Moshi had no idea, or his rage would have sent him to an early grave. It was nearing the end of the year, and the Bureau of Military Affairs was busy, so Moshi returned home late many days in a row. One particular night, he returned from a dinner party so late even Li Wei had already retired. He'd had a bit to drink at the party, but he had always been self-disciplined and drank only out of courtesy, not for pleasure. He certainly never indulged to the point of drunkenness. His chest was just rather warm, causing some minor discomfort. As he came to the courtyard that held his own quarters, he spied Gumong squatting by the lotus pond, bathing the big black dog with his sleeves rolled up. When the black dog caught sight of Moshi, it struggled free of Gumong's grip and immediately ran off. Gumong got to his feet, water dripping from his arms. "Are you a pig?" Moshi snapped with his usual impatience. The black dog had splashed Gumong with water, compelling him to wipe a hand down his face. Moshi caught sight of that hand, fingers bright red from the cold, and suddenly thought of the old Gumong, who had lied to everyone and snuck out to earn money washing dishes just to spoil him. Something seemed to have lodged in his throat. Only after a long interval did he manage to say, "Are you a pig? Why can't you fetch firewood and heat up some water to wash him with?" "Fando doesn't like heat." "Who?" Gumong used his sleeve to mop away another trickling stream of water. "Fando." Moshi realized he was talking about the black dog that had been inseparable from him since Luomei Pavilion, and was rendered momentarily mute. Gumong always put the care and comfort of others above himself, often to his own detriment. Now, all he had was this dog brother, so he cared for the dog's feelings the same way he had cared for people. In the chill night air, Moshi studied Gumong's face, taking in the way the bright moonlight illuminated his clean features, his pure expression, and his tranquil blue eyes. He wanted to say, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" But when his lips moved, the sneering words that emerged were, "Aren't you a saint?" He went inside to bathe and wash up, then climbed into bed with his robes fastened. But he tossed and turned, incapable of sleep. Lately, he felt like he was becoming increasingly unhinged. Without an answer from Gumong, he was like an unexercised, vengeful ghost, driving himself madder and madder. Sometimes he even thought it would be better if Gumong died, or if he himself did. It would be better than this incessant guessing, this tumultuous torment. After midnight, it started to snow. Moshi stared into the dark through dry eyes. Suddenly, an impulse seized him. He flung the canopy aside and rushed outdoors without bothering to put on his shoes, his feet landing on the soft snow, gleaming white as willow fuzz. "Gumong," he yelled into the cave-like entrance within the pile of Taihu stones, thinking to himself that perhaps it was high time he got checked out by a doctor. Gumong, you'd better come out. Excuse me. The entrance curtain rustled, and Gumong emerged, confused and half awake. He rubbed at his eyes. What's wrong? Moshi ground his teeth for a long time before answering stiffly. Nothing. After a pause, he spat out. But I don't want to be the only one awake. Any normal person would surely blanch with fright and shriek, horrified, You must be crazy. But Gumong was clearly not a normal person. He only stood there, his eyes sleepy and unfocused, and calmly said, Oh. That exhalation was as calm as the water in an old well. Such an utterance wouldn't have elicited the slightest ripple of emotion from a normal person. But Moshi clearly wasn't normal either. The water fell into roiling oil, and sparks instantly filled the sky. Rage surged within Moshi. He was barefoot in the icy night, clad in a thin robe, but he felt not a hint of chill. Instead, he felt violently hot. He stared at Gumong, fiery sparks filling his eyes. Then he grabbed the man's arm so tightly red marks instantly appeared on Gumong's wrist. He yanked him close and glared into his face. I'm in a bad mood. Haven't you lost your wits now? Haven't you lost all your dignity, all your understanding of shame, all your memories? Don't you submit meekly to everything? He watched those bewildered, drowsy eyes in the snowy night. In those blue eyes, he saw his own face, driven mad by suppressing himself for days on end. He realized he was being quite ridiculous. He swallowed thickly in an attempt to contain the defiant fury within him, but his breaths were still scaldingly, scorchingly hot. Very well. He tightened his grip on Gumong's arm and stared down at him. You'll keep me company tonight. That's the end of that chapter. Now we're at chapter 51, which is called Don't Move. Sparks flew from the charcoal brazier, and the pale blue bed canopy hung open. Moshi sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Gumong with dark eyes. Get on your knees. Gumong had learned how to kneel at Lome Pavilion long ago, but he didn't like doing it. It wasn't because of pride, but because he didn't know what those people telling him to kneel wanted from him. He got on his knees as he was told every time, but for some reason, the spite on their faces never faded. Rather, they only flushed redder with rage. He didn't know what part of this position he'd gotten wrong. Gumong hesitated as he looked at Moshi. Then he knelt, falling to his knees by the bed of Shiha Manor's master, down by that man's feet. In the past, he hadn't cared if others were satisfied with him, but he depended on the person before him for sustenance. Since the meat on tomorrow's table was at stake, he hoped that he could lift Moshi's spirits. But Moshi didn't look satisfied. Did anyone ever tell you what it means to kneel? He glanced downward and asked in a chilling tone. Gumong shook his head. Getting on your knees denotes submission, humility, and deference. Moshi stared at him. But there's none of that in your face. You've only bent your knees. Your back is still straight. Gumong said nothing. It seemed as though he had no idea what to say. He remained kneeling, blinking in helpless bewilderment. The frank honesty of his gaze verged on rudeness. This was indeed why he had infuriated everyone who had instructed him to kneel. Though he got down on his knees, there was no shame on his face. Over the past 2 years, so many people had sought to see him humbled and ruined, wanted to see him live a life worse than death, but no one had succeeded. Gumong was like a blank sheet of paper, calmly accepting all their venom and disdain. His ignorance had become his greatest shield. Moshi's rage flared once more. He grabbed Gumong by the jaw and leaned over to stare into his eyes. His aura was like a sword unsheathing with a metallic clang, ready to run Gumong through. "Gumong, do you really think I wouldn't lay a hand on you?" After staring at him for a long while, Gumong's response was to ask, unexpectedly, "Did you drink?" Stunned silent, Moshi froze. He seemed to have been reminded of something. He let go of Gumong at once, as if burned. He had used too much strength. His fingers had branded 2 bright red marks on Gumong's pale cheek. Moshi turned away, voice stormy. "That's none of your business." Gumong touched his own cheek. There were lots of people who drank at Luomei Pavilion. They drank a lot, and then they'd become very bad. "That's called being drunk," Moshi said coldly. "Then are you drunk?" Moshi turned and shot him a glare. "If I were drunk, could I still talk to you like this?" "Then have you been drunk before?" Outside, the snow fell whisper soft, and the northern wind wailed. For a moment, neither spoke, and the only sound within the room came from the crackling brazier. "I've never been drunk. Only once did I have a little too much, just that once. You saw me, you teased me, and you forgave me. From then on, I kept myself strictly in check, and never allowed myself such lack of restraint again. How did you forget? How could you forget? How dare you forget?" These words roiled in his heart, hot as steam, but the sentence that left his mouth was coldly unfeeling. "My affairs are of no concern of yours." Gumong fell silent. The two of them looked wordlessly at each other. Moshi stared at Gumong as if he could see through those limpid blue eyes directly into Gumong's heart. Moshi thought if only he could see straight in. If only he could cruelly tear this man apart, pierce him through. If only he could get a good look at the secrets in his bones, the currents in his blood, the filth in his soul. If he could see how dirty the man kneeling before him was, perhaps he'd let go of this persistent attachment. Gumong wiggled his bare feet and asked, "When you told me to keep you company, did you..." Sorry. "When you told me to keep you company, did you want us to stare at each other?" Moshi glared. "Don't be ridiculous." "Then what do you want me to do?" Moshi began to think in earnest malice, deliberately tearing his gaze away from Gumong. The words, "You'll keep me company tonight," were clearly suggestive and inappropriate, but neither man thought of it that way. Moshi was truly determined to refuse Gumong a peaceful slumber if he himself couldn't sleep, and Gumong had accepted the camaraderie of sharing sleep, or the lack thereof, with the man who provided him his meals. "Here, you read. I'll sleep." Moshi browsed his bookshelf, then tossed a scroll titled Legends of Divine Catastrophe at Gumong. "I can't read." "Hasn't Li Wei been teaching you for the past month?" Moshi grumpily waved off his protestations and lay down. "Read the words you know." "Oh." Gumong accepted Legends of Divine Catastrophe and began to read out loud, starting with the title, Legs of Vine Cat. Moshi nearly smacked him in the face with a pillow. When Gumong finished reading, Moshi had understood not a single sentence of this book he'd memorized at the age of 5. Whatever Gumong had read aloud was a work of literature entirely novel to Moshi. In the second half of the night, the still sleepless Moshi rolled out of bed, glared balefully at Gumong for a long interval, then suddenly yanked him upright. "Where are we going?" asked Gumong. The study. Gumong had been kneeling for a long time, so his legs were numb with pins and needles when he was abruptly lifted to his feet. After staggering a few steps, he crumpled to the ground, and as he fell, he instinctively reached out to grab something. In his disoriented state, the closest thing to him was Moshi, so he wrapped his arms around Moshi's waist. The coldest days of winter were upon them, but the coal fire in the room was roaring, and Moshi, hot-blooded and hale, was dressed very lightly. When Gumong embraced him, the only thing separating him from Moshi's slender waist was a thin layer of underclothes. Moshi's abs rose and fell with his breath beneath Gumong's palms, and those ever-tidy lapels had been pulled askew, exposing a glimpse of his well-muscled chest. Blue, now I'm imagining Moshi as that lady with the pan singing, "I can't get a wink because of y'all. You're never gonna sleep because of me." That's a reference to something, and I feel like I should know what it is, but I don't. Moshi turned to level him with a dark and inscrutable stare. If any ordinary woman were in Gumong's place, or even certain men, they would definitely be swooning over Shihajun's masculine scent and imposing physique. But Gumong's past affections had faded, and it seemed that, as a wolf, he had no interest in matters of love. Thus, he saw nothing noteworthy about the male body in front of him. If he were pressed for his thoughts, he'd probably say that this body felt hard and hot and seemed to carry a whiff of danger. It's a bit of a meme, yeah. Oh, it's from a Vine. Okay. Okay, awesome. I will check it out when you share it on Discord. I'm out of the loop. Let go. Moshi gritted out between clenched teeth. With his arms still wrapped around Moshi's waist, Gumong looked up at him with those blue eyes and said baldly, "I can't stand up." He pointed at his legs. "They're not working." Moshi's expression darkened further and further. "They're just numb. They still work fine. I said, let go of me." At the sight of Moshi's riled expression, Gumong thought to himself that this man really was very easily set off. He clearly had no clue how to care for his companions. Even Fan Do was better than him in this respect. He thus silently released Moshi and staggered to his feet. Almost immediately, Moshi pushed open the door and, without looking back, walked through the colonnade into the study. The manor's study was secluded and sparsely furnished. It was therefore unsurprising that the room did not contain a coal brazier. Moshi had a fire-type core to begin with, which, coupled with his hot-blooded vigor, meant that the cold didn't bother him in the least. Dressed in a single thin robe, he strode over to the desk. He glanced back at Gumong, who was hovering by the door, and said, "Get the hell in here. Hop to it." Gumong paused for a second, then crouched low to the ground. "What are you doing?" Starting from the doorstep, Gumong began to hop over. Once, twice. Moshi was about to implode with fury. "I didn't mean literally." Gumong looked up and sighed. "Okay, then you tell me how to do it." If not for the look on his face, indicating that he was humbly and agreeably seeking instruction, Moshi could have mistaken him for the old, incorrigible Gumong trying to tease him. Moshi resisted the urge to blow up with all he had and said, "Come here." It seemed like Gumong was worried he'd infuriate his volatile companion again. "I don't need to hop over there anymore, right? Walk." Gumong stood up and walked to Moshi. He watched Moshi calmly, awaiting his next words. Moshi looked through the titles on the shelf for a book suitable for introductory reading and came away empty-handed. Frowning, he grabbed a brush and paper, along with an inkstone and inkstick, and laid them out on the rosewood desk. "How many words have you learned from Li Wei?" Gumong counted on his fingers. After using all his fingers, he wiggled his bare feet and continued counting on his toes. When he had determined that the words he knew outnumbered all his fingers and toes put together, he crowed proudly. "Lots." Moshi pulled out a chair. "Sit." Gumong sat and cast Moshi an inquisitive glance. Moshi crossed his arms and leaned across the rosewood table, looking Gumong up and down. With a wave of his hand, a wisp of flame issued from his palm and lit all the lamps in the room. "I'll be the judge of that." What does judge mean? It means I'll say something, and you'll write it out. Bad habits learned at Danmei Pavilion were likely still stuck in Gumong's mind. He clumsily took up the brush, dipped it in ink, and then asked, "If I can write them, will there be a reward?" "You'll be punished if you can't." Gumong's eager expression turned anxious. He tentatively asked, "No more food for me?" Moshi glanced at him without replying. Under the golden candlelight, Gumong's thin face was so close to his. His eyes, so blue they seemed to have been rinsed by the sea, were fixed on Moshi. Since the day Gumong came to Shiha Manor, Moshi had very rarely seen the numbness and apathy he'd had in his eyes when they were first reunited at Danmei Pavilion. Humanity was gradually returning to Gumong's gaze. But no matter how many times Moshi tried, he never unearthed even the tiniest hint that Gumong still remembered his past. Moshi said, "We'll talk about it." "I need to have food," Gumong persisted, "or else I'm going to be hungry." Moshi glared at him. "What makes you think you can bargain with me? Right." Sloppy handwriting splotched across the paper. Moshi would say a word, and Gumong would write it out. If he wrote it correctly, Moshi would remain silent, but if he got it wrong, Moshi would call him an idiot. Moshi made Gumong write the numbers 1 through 5, followed by Gumong's own name, and then Moshi's name. Still utterly unsatisfied, with his emotions in turmoil, Moshi demanded Gumong write, "In life, I'll return to you. In death, I will yearn for you." There's a footnote. This is from the poem Ode to My Wife by the Han Dynasty statesman Yuwu, and "This longing will only end when we see each other again." And that is from the poem Long Yearning by Song Dynasty poet Yan Jidao. Even when it was clear Gumong couldn't possibly know how to write any of these words, Moshi refused to let him go. Instead, he pinned him to the chair and forbade him from moving. "I don't know how." Gumong was woeful. The light in the room was soft and dim, the snow outside a hazy white. Moshi looked at the crooked words strewn messily all over the page. In each line of yearning verse, there were mistakes in every direction. He walked behind Gumong and took the brush. "I'll teach you." As sleet struck the windowsill, Gumong sat in his chair, while Moshi's tall figure leaned over him. Each of Moshi's brushstrokes were peerlessly beautiful, exquisitely elegant. He wrote, and Gumong copied him clumsily. Halfway through, he couldn't hold back a sneeze. Moshi's hand stilled, and he looked down. Cold? Gumong didn't like to inconvenience other people, especially other men. This stubborn streak showed even now. He shook his head, only to sneeze again. "Go put on a coat. If you freeze to death, it'd be a bother having to take care of you." "It's only a little cold." Gumong rubbed his nose. Not too bad. Moshi simply could not insist after that. If he kept on demanding, it would seem like he cared about him. So he continued teaching Gumong how to write. But as the lesson wore on, Gumong couldn't bear the cold anymore. Without conscious thought, he began instinctively inching toward the only heat source in the room, Moshi. Little by little, he edged closer. Moshi, immersed in his instruction, was unaware of Gumong's movements at first. By the time he noticed, Gumong was already tucked close to him, like a wolf seeking warmth from its pack, as though, in the next breath, he'd nestle into Moshi's embrace. Moshi's eyes darkened. Without a word, he set the brush aside and seized Gumong by the jaw, forcing him to look up. Moshi narrowed his eyes in stormy displeasure. When I told you to get the hell out and put some clothes on, you refused. Now what? That's the end of the chapter. It's 4:57, and the next chapter, chapter 52, is called Unintentional Seduction. So that's something. So I think that's where we're gonna return to on Wednesday when we come back. Oopsie. At least it's not like a bad cliffhanger. Yeah. It's not a weekend cliffhanger. It's not like a bad one. No one is in danger, as far as we know. It could be much worse. Well, thank y'all for reading with me today. This one was like less of a roller coaster than last time. Last time was like all of the things. But I'm excited to find out what happens next. I will see y'all again on Wednesday at 3. And please have a good rest of your day and a good Tuesday before I see y'all again. Thank you for coming. Peace out, y'all.